Iowa Soybean Association is driven to deliver for Iowa's 40,000 soybean farmers. We're proud to provide objective agronomic research, a helping hand with soil and water stewardship, and timely industry news powered by the Soybean Checkoff. Learn more at iasoybeans.com.
Dry pattern, wet pattern, in between? What's it looking like in the growing areas that we cover on Market to Market, as well as around the world as we look for indicators of what areas are going to possibly grow more or grow less because of what rainfall happens or hot conditions happen. We're going to go global today and talk about the weather. New guest to talk about the weather this week on the M2M podcast. I'm Paul Yeager. DT David Tolleris from weatherrisk.com is our guest. We will focus Eastern Corn Belt, Western Corn Belt, the plains. Then we'll head south to South America, then India, Australia, China, Russia. You get the picture. We're going to go a lot of places. We're going to say some very scientific things and then some very easy to understand and how important the next few weeks are going to be in the growing season. But I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know, but just here is something to think about and something to chew on as you look forward into the growing season. There's a couple of phrases, and I bring it up towards the end of the discussion today. We're going to talk about a rhino. We're going to talk about the blocking ridge, as well as the Dome of Doom in today's M2M podcast, which you can listen to right now. Did Ross Geller make you not be a paleontologist when you watched Friends, or was there a weather inspiration on why you went from dinosaurs into weather?
Yeah, when you're growing up with a fairly large family, in the late 60s and 70s, and you're telling people the size of a Tyrannosaurus Rex or the latest theory that some dinosaurs might have been primitively warm-blooded, nobody cares. But if you can tell them that it might snow 2 days from now, people go, huh? What? So, it's a matter, for me, it's originally a matter of getting, attention and recognition. And then the other thing was, of course, beginning to actually understand and predict the future when other people couldn't do that. So to me, that's just, and that goes beyond meteorology. I follow global trends with, economics and history and other things going on there. So it's just being able to, the meteorology thing is mostly just being able to see the future. And has always sparked an interest in me in being able to see and predict trends when other people don't do it. I'm a big black swan guy, Nissim Taleb. I'm a big, unpredictable, end of the bell curve type of guy. So I've always been that.
But you're not saying, DT, that you can predict the black swans. You just use science to look at where one might be forming.
They're fascinating. The black swans you can predict are not actually black swans. I think they're called rhinos or gray rhinos because you should have seen them coming. Like, for example, in his book, The Black Swan, Taleb says on page 217, this was back in the early 2000s when he first wrote the book, that there's going to be a global pandemic because of the way the world's interconnected. He says it's inevitable. It's going to happen, and we're not prepared for it. He wrote that 20 years ago. That's not a bad prediction. That's pretty impressive.
No, it's not. It is incredibly impressive. And the other thing is, David, we talk about black swans all the time on Market, but nobody ever that says the rhino is coming. That is something that I'll have to maybe flip that into my vernacular.
Yeah, look, it's one of the terms out there. Black swans, gray rhinos, whatever. Sure, but yes, it's one of those terms out there.
So meteorology.
Yeah.
You did a little bit of time understanding commodities, but for you, it's much more the weather. Let's first just tell me what weather risk is.
Well, I provide weather information to all types of businesses and organizations that need it. I do, here in Virginia, the East Coast, I do a lot of ski resorts, I do construction companies, and then I do some farming here with the Virginia grain producers here. But, mostly my ability to see things and focus on the extended stuff, day 3, day 7, day 10, day 12, day 30 is really important for people in all kinds of businesses. And that was the thing that surprised me about it when I first started out doing trading. Construction has a demand for it. Vineyards have a demand for it. I do a lot of Virginia vineyards here in the Mid-Atlantic. It's just besides the ski resorts. So, if that's what's so interesting about it. And the problem is the TV stations are so bad at doing it. And, There's a reason for that. When you go to meteorology school, it's all about chasing tornadoes and severe thunderstorms. Okay, they don't spend a lot of time now. That's changed recently. Over some of the schools now are picking up on the last 5 or 10 years. But when I was an undergrad, they kept telling people, it was all about chasing tornadoes and severe, because you couldn't do anything beyond 3 days. We didn't have the understanding. We didn't have the computing power. We couldn't do it. Now that we do, okay, and now there's more focus on it. But that's what it was. I don't chase tornadoes. I mean, you saw the movie Twister, right? Both of them. The original one, the obnoxious scientist get sucked up in a cloud and killed chasing a tornado. That's me. I'm not doing that. So,
which means you would have been in Iowa, because they filmed some of that in Iowa,
yes,
30 years ago.
Right. I would.
Well, okay, let's talk. You have shared with me before kind of your 3-month outlook. You talk about 3 days. Let's look at 3 months. We're kind of in the middle of that right now. We're in the middle of planting. I've had conversations with people in Ohio and friends online. It's still wet there. Eastern Corn Belt.
Yes.
Is that forecast coming true, that what you thought was going to happen, it was going to be wet?
Yeah, I said that the Eastern Corn Belt was going to be great this year, no real problems, and that's the way it has been. They've been getting the rain. Some of it's been excessive rain, like we saw a few weeks ago with the flooding in Arkansas, Tennessee, and Kentucky. But the Eastern Corn Belt is much better. And if you look at the anomalies, over the month of April, you'll see that. Places like Nebraska, some places had in the month of April haven't got an inch of rain or less. I mean, very dry. Now, South Dakota done much better in April. There are areas that had 2, 3, 5, 6 inches of rain. Iowa did pretty good, especially eastern Iowa for April. They did pretty good. Missouri did great. Kansas, not bad. They've had one of the wettest Aprils they've had on record. And Tulsa's had its wettest April ever. So did Oklahoma City, on record. Texas Panhandle has done good. But now you notice we're changing here, and we're beginning to look a little drier. And if you look at the anomalies for May, they're quite dry in the western Corn Belt, the Upper Plains. Next 7 days, there's no rain coming at all for the western Corn Belt or the Upper Plains at all, let's say from Nebraska northward. And that also applies to our friends in the Canadian prairies. And then we'll see what happens in week 2. There's some indication there might be a pretty good rain event in week 2 across, Nebraska to Ohio, but I'm not certain about that yet. But yeah, generally, I like the spring forecast is shaping up from what I looked at. It did in late March. I like the way things are developing, and I still think we're looking at a pretty dry July and August in a good portion of the Midwest.
How dry?
People, when you mention dryness, the first thing that happens is somebody's going to mention 2012. And it just, as a meteorologist, it drives you nuts. You see this with hurricanes and snowstorms, on the East Coast. Whenever it's a snowstorm, you're like March 1999, the superstorm? No, just a snowstorm, okay? Just a snowstorm. It doesn't have to be the most extreme thing of all time. I guess it's because, we're in the information age or the misinformation age, as the case may be. And, they take the hurricane, it's going to be the biggest one. No, it's just, it's going to be hot. It's going to be dry. I don't think it's going to be a disaster. But, I think if you're looking for trend line yields, no, seriously, you're looking for trend line yields in July and August, I got problems with that. I don't see that happening. There are a lot of reasons for that happening. And we can get into those reasons, but I'm doubtful that's going to happen.
Are there areas that are more apt to be trend line or not be trend line?
The Corn Belt is looking great. I think they'll be trend line yields. I think they'll have a great crop. From what I'm saying, I don't see any reason why they're not. So I think they're in pretty good shape. So that may counterbalance what we're going to see some loss in the western Corn Belt. So that may end up, averaging out. So, and that's really what we're looking at here. We're not looking like 2012, which is a disaster everywhere. We're looking at areas where you're going to have regional dryness. And some areas, the Delta and the Eastern Corn Belt are going to be pretty good. Southeastern safely pretty good. But, the Western Corn Belt, the Upper Plains, Canadian prairies are going to have problems.
Weather to me always has patterns or things, and it seems to be if you get rain in spring, you'll get rain throughout the year. Am I making stuff up here?
There's some science behind that because you also have the science, drought begets drought. You've heard that one too. But if that's true, and we see how, the drought monitor, if you look at the latest drought monitor map, you'll see that the drought conditions in the plains are kind of shrinking a little bit because of the recent rains. Now that's going to start picking up again because we're heading a dry week, 10 days coming up. But Yes, weather definitely runs in cycles. And one of the things that we know is that you can predict these cycles to some degree out 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. So right now we are kind of stuck in a repeating weather pattern. And if you look at the maps for late March and April, we'll see that consistently we keep getting this deep trough coming into California and the Rockies. And then the jet stream goes from there up towards Minnesota. And everybody east of that is fairly warm on the East Coast, the southeastern states. And then your storms keep going from California and Nevada across up towards, the up across the country. And you end up getting a very particular type of storm track, is I guess what I'm trying to say here. And this pattern keeps repeating itself. So that's one of the reasons why we had such dry conditions in the upper plains in February, March, into early April before it began to change. Now we're starting to get more rains into the upper plains, but I'm not sure if that's going to hold. There are the things going on in the atmosphere which are kind of forcing the pattern to remain the same. And we need something to change the atmosphere on a global scale to get the pattern to change in the U.S. so we can get back to a normal rainfall pattern. So that's not happening.
Is this a La Nina, El Nino,
Well,
a
we have
neutral
La
pattern?
Nina. The La Nina is officially dead. So there are a couple of things going on here. There is a pool of large cold water which has developed off the west coast of North America, off of Baja, and west coast of Mexico, that extends southwestward towards the equator. This pool of cold water is known as the negative phase of the PMM, Pacific Meridional Mode. There's a positive phase and a cold phase to it. And when you have a cold phase to it, it produces La Nina-like conditions, even if you don't have La Nina. So that's been going on for a while, and that's one of the reasons why we turned quite dry in the Western Corn Belt and the plains in February and March, because of this cold pool. Now that's continuing, that hasn't changed. So that's one factor, which is it's creating La Nina-like conditions, even though we're technically not La Nina. So that's one thing. Another factor is another thing called the AMM, which is the atmospheric angular momentum. Okay. Without getting too technical about this is a relatively new thing. The Earth has a rotation, and the atmosphere spins around the Earth. It has a rotation. And sometimes when the atmosphere goes over mountains and over the land, the atmosphere rotation changes or shifts. So you have two different forces at work, the Earth's rotation and the atmosphere around the Earth. And when you get into a negative phase of the AMM, when it drops down, that means there's low energy in the atmosphere, and you keep getting repeating patterns. You don't get big cold air masses plunging south. You don't get a lot of energy coming north. It's just a repeating oscillating pattern in a certain range. And that's where you are now. We've been that since March. So there's nothing going on in the atmosphere to force a big change. And the other aspect of that is, of course, the MJO, the Matty-Julian oscillation. Now, a lot of people know about this. It has 8 different phases. Each phase corresponds to a particular type of temperature and precipitation pattern in the U.S., in Australia, in South America, in China, in India. It has a very pronounced influence. The MJO is actually thunderstorms, convection, which forms in the Indian Ocean and travels along the equator towards South America. And as it moves across, it goes to different phases. And that energy changes and alters the jet stream. Now, for the past 30 days, the MJO has been sleeping out like a light, stuck in what we call the neutral circle. And the data shows for the next 30 days, it's not changing either. So it's still stuck in the neutral circle. So that's another thing that can cause the atmosphere to change. It's not happening. So we're stuck in a quiet, normal cycle, which means that you're, getting that kind of pattern where it's very normal and it keeps repeating. And we had a big storm. The rains we had yesterday, the day before, in the lower plains and Texas Panhandle and New Mexico and Oklahoma, those were good rains. That came from a big system which came into California. In April and early May, you don't get these giant lows crashing into Southern California, but that's what they've been getting. They keep getting it. There's another one coming next week.
We always like to talk about years of pattern. You already mentioned 2012, but
Right.
Has there been another year where this type of pattern is set up, where it rains in the southern plains?
I'm actually just started looking at that. I just started looking at to see. I don't know that offhand. I know I keep getting deluged by the 2012 calls. People just going crazy with that.
I know it comes up on market a lot. People are always talking about it, but they talk about that all the time. So it's not
Right.
just year specific
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
You mentioned an area to watch, but I've also heard to look at the Gulf of Alaska as a predictor for more of the Western Corn Belt. Is that anything to look at?
Yeah, yeah, yes, it is. The way the pattern's shaping is um, that energy coming into California is actually dropping down from the Gulf of Alaska, dropping down from Anchorage down the coast, British Columbia, the West Coast down to Southern California. When that is happening, when you get a trough in the Eastern Pacific and right along the West Coast of North America, there's going to be a ridge downstream. Basic laws of physics. For every action, there's an opposite and actual reaction. So for every trough, there's a ridge. For every ridge, there's a trough. So when your trough is on the west coast of North America, from British Columbia to California, that places your ridge over the eastern Rockies, the Canadian prairies, and the plains. And that's why you don't get your rain. I mean, the rainfall is falling really far behind the Canadian prairies. And they got nothing coming up for the next 10, 12, 14 days. So that's an issue in this pattern. They're not doing great. So they had an okay winter, but they're not doing great in this pattern. So far, the moisture levels in the Canadian prairies are doing okay. They're not bad, but it's not getting it. The point is that kind of pattern doesn't bring rain to the upper plains, and it's not great for the Western Corn Belt. So yes, when you have that energy in the Gulf of Alaska down to California and Oregon, Washington, downstream, that causes problems. That's absolutely correct. Yes. And that's what we're
All right,
looking
you
at.
mentioned a couple of other countries. I guess let's go South America since you'd mentioned the equator first. What's that weather pattern here looking like in the next 3 months for Brazil and Argentina?
Well, they're doing okay. They've had a very wet April. Normally, as you go into April, what happens is rainfall amounts, in the corn areas in Brazil, the second corn crop, the rainfall drops off in Mato Grosso and Goiás and Tocantins and those areas. That didn't happen. They've actually had a really nice April with a lot of areas, relatively speaking, above normal rainfall. So they're doing pretty good, and I think they're looking fine here. I don't see any reason to anticipate it like July is their January. So in Southern Hemisphere, where they get their best chances of frost or anything like that, I don't see any reason to anticipate something like that's going to happen. I think they're in for a pretty normal next 3 months there. So I think they're okay. Australia looks pretty good. I don't see any problems there. The problems that are developing is in Europe. Northwestern Europe have been very dry for a long period of time. They have the drought conditions developing there, and some crop stress in western and northern France. Ukraine, the western Ukraine has been very dry. They have a lot of crop stress there. The Volga district in Russia, down by Kazakhstan, they're doing pretty bad with it. A lot of crop stress there. Now, the one area that's doing really well is the southern district towards the Caucasus and the Black Sea. They've had great rains for April. They're doing outstanding. So that part of Russia is doing great. But as soon as you go north of that, it's not a raindrop. So it's just the one area you're doing great rain. Everybody else is awful. So it's just one of those. It's just one of those things that happens with weather patterns.
Well, is that enough of an impact on? I mean, let's tie a little commodities here together. Is
Sure.
that enough to impact a wheat market or a corn
For
growing in that
France,
region?
well, yeah. Now, in the U.S. winter wheat, with those recent rains we've had, they're doing great. That winter wheat crop in the U.S. is looking great. Okay, but the European and the Russian wheat crop is not looking that good. So they'll have problems, but is enough to counter the winter wheat in the U.S.? No, I think right now in the U.S. in particular, the market is going to saying, well, the winter wheat crop looks pretty good. And okay, they got problems in France, they got problems in Russia, they got problems in Ukraine, but right now the winter wheat crop looks really good. So I think the market
Last year watching the Tour de France, we got to see firsthand on some of those incredible aerial pictures of the race how dry it was in some of those wheat areas. Are we looking at a year 2 there?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And that's what it looked like, definitely. And that's one of the areas to look at as well. Let's talk about the Atlantic Ocean. Now, as you know, there's been a lot of talk recently about how warm the Atlantic has been and its impact on the hurricane season. Well, if you look at the sea surface temperatures right now, that's not true. The Atlantic right now is the coldest it's been in several years, and one of the coldest since the year 2000. The Eastern Atlantic off the coast of Africa and the tropics is below normal. And now we haven't seen that, like I said, in several years. The one area where it's really warm is in northeast portions of the North Atlantic. Iceland, Ireland, Great Britain, France, Spain. They have a lot of warm ocean water temperatures there. And that produces extra energy, the atmosphere, which is anchoring the ridge in Great Britain and Western France, which is why they're not getting the rain. So yes, there is a direct connection between the ocean water temperatures and the atmosphere. And as long as that water in the Northeast Atlantic remains that warm, the pattern in Western Europe is not going to change. So the two things are definitely connected.
Let's move to the east, China.
Yeah.
What are we looking at there?
Well, they've having, I guess you've seen it, they've had extreme heat in India and they've had some heat in China, but not nearly to the same degree. They're doing okay, but they're kind of locking into a pattern right now. And again, it would be really useful for them to get into a different MJO phase because the MJO definitely affects India and China. And right now it's not doing anything. So they're stuck in the same phase here. They got some problems in northern China, nothing severe, but it's getting a little, dry in some areas. So that's something to watch. Southern China looks okay, especially south of the Yangtze River. But they because of the climatology there, even if they have dry 2 weeks, they get one wet week there. They have enough rain for the next 60 days. So southern China just pours rain all the time. But that's just the climatology there. But northern China, the North China Plain, they got a few problems. If this continues another 30 days, it might be more serious. So we'll see. We can't change the pattern by the time we get to the beginning of June, things could be more of a problem in northern China. But right now, it's okay. It's just something to watch.
I love a map of 7 to 10 days, but let's talk 60 to 120 around the world. What has the most volatility for weather that is one of those unknowns we don't quite have, but need to watch?
Yeah. Well, obviously, I think France, the European grain is an issue that has to be watched. We talked about that. Also, the Russia, the Kazakhstan area, the Volga district, that's a problem. The Canadian prairies, I guess, I don't know if it's a global area, but, it should be mentioned. They're looking very dry. They're looking quite warm. And I don't see a lot of rain in the forecast for the next 30 days or beyond. I think they're going to have a problem in this pattern unless it changes. And one other area, Australia looks okay. Doesn't look like any problems there. India is off to a very hot start. There's some indication the monsoon there is going to start soon. Usually starts in June, so that should be the case. Right now, the monsoon in India looks about normal, does not look bad, unless, of course, Pakistan and India start dropping bombs on each other, then the whole thing's off. But, oh well. But those were the areas.
Well, that's the stuff you're not predicting.
No.
Yeah.
Hard to say that one.
No, we're going to let that one be.
And
I get what you're saying.
Yeah, there's some concern in northern China, but it's not severe, not a big issue yet. But 30 days from now, it might be things don't change.
All right, DT, you follow agriculture just enough to know to be dangerous in this question. But does the market react differently than it did maybe at the beginning of your career than it does now to weather locally versus weather globally?
The reaction time is faster because their models come out faster. So, when I first started out, the GFS were only going out to 7 days. That's 25 years ago. So, it was that. And I'm not sure if it was the GFS. It might have been called the MRF then back then. And the European model had just come out and people didn't know whether it was accurate or whether it was what it was. So, and of course, for most of the last 15 years, the heavy emphasis has been on the GFS, the American weather model, because it's freely accessible. People can find it everywhere. It comes out 4 times a day. The problem, but on the other hand, that also causes a problem because, you have one model run which says you're going to get 2 inches of rain in Iowa. And then the next model one comes out and says sunny. And all the rain is in southern Missouri. And you're like, what the heck happened? Now, how do you trade that? The market's way down and you open up and then the rain disappears. Oh, it's up again. They cause a lot of volatility. Now, the GFS has gotten a little better. And there are other models out there. So we have that. So that helps. The new improvements in GFS, the instability has gone away to some degree. So that helps. Also, the European models had several upgrades and the information comes out earlier on the European and sooner. So that can get in, so you can say, well, is it going to rain this much? It changes. What's the European looking at? Oh, it's got about the same amount of rain. So I can stick with the forecast. That helps a little bit too. So, the new technologies and the upgraded computing powers made a difference in terms of how we as meteorologists can get the forecasts out to farmers and traders. So that is one thing that's really changed over the last 20, 25 years.
And let's face it, we all look at services like yours, and we all might have 6 weather apps that we look at, and we
Yeah.
kind of play junior meteorologists for our own neighborhood to
Yeah.
figure out what our farm plan, construction plan,
Yeah.
and grain marketing plan should be.
Well, now the weather apps are an interesting story. I run into that all the time. Operationally, when I'm doing the winter weather stuff, the weather app will come out. It'll have 6 inches of snow here, and then the app that it's got 1, and people, what the heck happened? And then it causes all sorts of problems. And then you'll see the weather app that will show 40 degrees and snow, and then people start yelling. I mean, how can the weather app show 40 degrees and snow? Well, yeah, but that's because you didn't look at the forecast. The 40 degrees might be at 1 o'clock in the morning before the cold front hits, and temperatures are dropping all day. So when the snow starts, it might be 31 degrees. And, part of the problem, I get people ask me all the time, am I going to have a weather app? The answer is no. I think the weather apps are for the next 2 days, the weather apps are okay. Okay. And the weather apps are really useful for carrying thunderstorm warnings, watches, tornado warnings, all kinds of severe weather. They're great. Okay. Beyond 2 or 3 days, they're not good because the same reason why the TV weather people aren't very good. I can't tell you 10 days from now whether the temperature in Des Moines, Iowa is going to be 80 or 79. It doesn't work that way. Okay. I can tell you whether it'll be seasonal or above normal, below normal. Okay. And that sort of stuff. It's probably going to be around 80. If anything, I might be biased towards the higher by a couple of degrees. So you can tell you that. And I can tell you, and if we get into a hot summer pattern, yeah, it looks like you're going to get to 95 by the end of the week at several locations in Iowa. So but you can't go, specific temperatures. It doesn't work. It doesn't work on the weather apps. It doesn't work on the TV stations. So, yeah, to me, it could.
I don't. Yeah, and I don't get bent out of shape if it's 80 versus 75. That to me, 5 degrees, I give that. That's what's going to happen. It's the couple weeks ago we had this possible tornado activity at a certain point, and all these activities canceled, and it ends up barely the sidewalk getting wet, and that's what frustrates people, and maybe almost to the point of saying, well, that's your credibility down the tubes there. See, those meteorologists don't have it. Whether they're looking at the app, and that's within, I'm not talking 6 days, I'm talking 6 hours is what we're looking at here.
Right. Well, so that does happen from time to time. And that's just the nature of the variability of the forecast.
No, I get it.
Because people have to remember, when you're dealing with the atmosphere, you're dealing with 2 forces, not one. The atmosphere consists of the oxygen, the air, the gases, and the water vapor. Okay, so we're dealing with 2 different forces here. You're dealing with the oxygen, the carbon dioxide, the nitrogen, and actual water vapor in the atmosphere. So you have 2 different forces going on here. It's not just one. That's what makes weather forecasting particularly difficult. And it also is a science that has more interaction with humans than any other science on a regular basis. I mean, you may like astronomy, but unless you're going looking at the sky, it doesn't interact with you every single day. Weather does. So you have a much, and the other thing about meteorology is that when you make a mistake, everybody knows about it. And everybody knows about it. Okay.
Oh, isn't it the case? And just think if you were on television doing what you were doing, you would certainly not hear the end of it. I know I worked with meteorologists. Going to the grocery store was always miserable. But I know how important it is, and I know that we all care tremendously. All right. Final thing here, DT. Let's recap again, Corn Belt. And it's growing. Eastern, Western look like they're going to have 2 different stories this year. You mentioned the higher temperatures. We look like we're going to get warmer faster here, at least in Iowa and Minnesota. I've seen some friends post. That gets to be a concern when you get to be 85 in May than in June. We get that. So what's my highlight that I got to look out for here in the next 30 days?
Well, okay. So generally the pattern looks for the next 30 days. It's going to be drier than normal in the Western Corn Belt and the Upper Plains. This week in particular looks really dry. There may be a significant rain event in the Central Plains through the heart of the Midwest in week 2. We're still trying to figure that out, if that's going to happen or not. And then week 3 and week 4 also go back to being dry. There is a significant blocking ridge, which is developing in the jet stream. As what that means, it's essentially a bubble of really warm air. Okay, a blocking high. During the summer months, a blocking ridge can become the dome of doom that sits over Iowa and Nebraska. That's not what this is, but this is a blocking ridge where the ridge is going from, the jet stream is going from California to Saskatchewan over to the Great Lakes and then down towards New England. That's a blocking ridge, and it sits to the north. And what it does is it forces all the precipitation to stay to the south and allows temperatures to warm up underneath the ridge. So that's what's keeping the Canadian prairies dry, and that's what's keeping the upper plains and the western Corn Belt dry. So that's definitely going to be an issue for the next 10 days. Like I said, we may get that rain event in week 2, which would be a nice rain event to get. But then week 3 and week 4 looks like it goes back to the same pattern. So May is a very critical month here, because if we get a lot of rain, we get more rain than we think in the western Corn Belt, it's going to give us a little bit of maneuvering room when it gets dry in July and August. But if we don't, okay, then that means we have problems. June becomes even more critical for July and August. So May is an important month here, especially for these dry areas in the western Corn Belt and the upper plains. April looks pretty good. We need another May to be like April. That's what we really need. Okay, and I don't see that happening.
We'll see how it unfolds. I have to admit, the new terms today I've learned: rhino, blocking ridge, and the dome of doom.
You haven't heard that one before? The dome. That's on the 1988 heat wave before 2012. That one back then. Yeah. Was a dome of doom.
Yeah, the 88 one was a famous one. I remember that.
Which is also a La Niña event too, just like 2012. So yes.
DT, thank you so much. Great to meet you. Appreciate your insight.
Anytime. Just Paul, just let me know. I'll always be willing to do stuff like this.
My thanks to DT, and thanks to you for watching, listening, or reading. New episodes of this podcast come out each and every Tuesday. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.